founders, held in celebration of this 50th year of the Sleep Research Society. I'm Sonyan Kohli-Israel, Professor of Psychiatry at the University of California, San Diego, and Chair of the Sleep Research Society Presidential Task Force on this 50th year of the SRS. In this series of conversations, we will learn from the men and women who both founded and sustained the field of sleep over the last 50 years. Our hope is that you, our viewers, those of you who have been in the field for a long time and those of you new to the field, will understand where we came from and understand our history, because it is only by knowing our past that we know how to go forward into the future.
The whole thing that, the PGO ways, when we discovered perchlorphenylalanine that seemed to cause that in wakefulness, we did an enormous amount of work with that compound, and I thought finally that it made cats hypersexual, and our test, the two funny little things that happened at our test was we had a big room with glass, and we put a couple of rats in the room and then a couple of cats in the room and see what the cats would do. And sometimes the cats would mount one another, and sometimes they'd try to mount the rat. It was kind of funny. But a reporter came from Italy, I think. I can't remember. But we would sit there for long periods of time watching the cats, and most of the time they did nothing. And we weren't able to film anything or do anything. Actually, just sit and watch. And this reporter came and sat there and watched us sit and watch and do absolutely nothing for a couple hours, and then left. And I think I did finally get a little clip paper from a newspaper that was American researchers are sedentary or something like that. But then I did have some movie film finally of cats mounting one another, presumably as a function of PCPA. And so I think it was the first meeting in Montreal or someplace in Canada. So I'm trying to get across the border, and the guy says, "What's this?" And the can was labeled sex film. And they held me until they could get a projector and actually view the film to see if it really was just cats. Anyway,
Can you guys...
I was careful after that.
Can you tell us how you first met? How the two of you first met?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know that I was working at the University of Chicago, and I sort of got there by whim. I had read an article about Robert Maynard Hutchins, who was sort of the boy wonder of American education. You could get a PhD, I think was the degree, in a week if you could pass the exams. And I assumed the medical school was included in all of this, and that I might get my MD in 2 years or something. And so I decided to go to the University of Chicago. It was quite a disillusionment, because the medical school was exactly like every other medical school in the bastion of ultra-liberalism for undergraduates. But then I took neurophysics. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I had a lecture from Nathaniel Kleitman, and I was interested in consciousness and what happened in the brain, and I thought, this is really the answer to study sleep, and whatever isn't present in sleep and is present in wake has got to be the substrate of consciousness, and that was a simple idea. So I went and asked Kleitman if I could work with him, and he had just decided to study eye movements. Al wasn't there yet.
No.
And he had a graduate student, Eugene Azarinsky, and Kleitman put me to work to help Azarinsky study eye movements. And it was just a fortunate time in the sense that the Grass Instrument Company and the Offner Company had finally developed workable EEG machines, which they'd sort of started before the war, but World War II really delayed all of that development. And there was a guy, John Perkins, was a respiratory physiologist who was a very punctilious man, but he would let me, he had the EEG machine, that's right, and he would let me borrow it, and Azarinsky, but then we had to polish it in the morning to give it back to him, so it was just really clean, and everybody's in sleep research prior to the use of computers remembers ink spraying all over the place. But my wife's relative, and then I got married, and I think the story was told today about, I told Kleitman, we only know that males have REM sleep or rapid eye movements, and it's possible women don't. We don't. And the little mythology that I married to get a female subject. But it's almost we got divorced because it's one thing it's another to jerk tape off the eyes and electrodes off the skin of somebody, and it hurts. We had some fights about that, I remember. But anyway, so I said, well, I think eye movements occur in women, with rapid eye movements. And I think by getting a chaperone, we could study a few other women. But at a certain point, it became pretty clear that women and men were not that different in terms of the presence or absence of rapid eye movements. But even so, I was still a Freudian and believed that dreams were the safety valve of the mind. I wasn't practicing Freud, but I had read the interpretation of dreams, and so I wanted to deprive people of dreaming sleep and see if they would become psychotic. And my wife's relativism, my parents were a little older, so they didn't visit. They were so worried I wouldn't be able to earn a living. And it really, really got contentious until finally I said, all right, I'll do an internship and I'll be able to practice medicine. And if worse comes to worse and all this research peters out, then I'll be able to earn a living. And then I fiddled around, and there's an intern matching program. I waited too long and suddenly it closed. And there I was, ready to leave Chicago, but no place to go. And you still weren't on the scene, I don't think.
I came right after you left.
Was the one man in the world, on the planet maybe, besides Kleitman. Azarinsky left prematurely, and I think he made a huge mistake in doing that, but he couldn't wait to get out and earn his living. But at any rate, Charles Fisher then arranged for me to come on board as an intern at the Mount Sinai Hospital, even though everything had been closed off. And he had to persuade, I remember the president of the hospital to accept me, and they did, and I did an internship. And Al took over, I guess, the lab that I left, which was not much of a lab. But
well, I worked in that corner of Kleitman's
office
till I got my own EEG machine.
Then you finally got a whole building.
Fine, yeah. Well, practically.
Has anyone else ever had a whole building?
So Charles Fisher was the guy with NPT, right? Wasn't he the first guy to really look at that?
Yeah, he was the first one to say really take it seriously, but he was doing tachistoscopic studies, and sort of, I don't really know if that work held up or not, but the idea would be you weren't conscious of a stimulus, but you dream about it. So he wanted me to do those studies, but I was interested in doing REM deprivation. And I want to repeat this again, but I worked, I don't know, the hardest work of my life was REM depriving cats of REM sleep and hoping to see them die, go psychotic, something happened. And somewhere along the line, Al found Jerry Vogel, I think it was depressed patients.
Jerry did it.
Anyway, but Jerry found not much happened, and I'm at the same time, just wearing out everybody with longer and longer periods of REM deprivation. Not much. We're going to die. And then there was this epical moment. I wish I kept a diary because it's like black and white. I'm having dinner with Al and Jerry Vogel. You can't imagine how this moment changed my life. And I'm talking about REM deprivation, REM deprivation, REM deprivation, REM deprivation. And Al finally says, Dement, you'd REM deprive your own mother. And Jerry Vogel says, that's all right, it wouldn't hurt her. And it all came crashing down, sort of. I mean, and I would say, and I've thought about this actually, that my good fortune was that I had been referred patients with narcolepsy. And you had also, Jerry Vogel did a patient with narcolepsy. And we realized, you and I published together a paper on the sleep onset REM period.
There was a moment, it was in a taxi cab in New York when we recognized that each of us had found the same thing.
Yeah, and so when I finally, I wasn't getting along with Dr. Fisher, bless his soul rest in peace, and I thought I really got to leave New York. And when I was in Chicago, I had gotten to be friends with a really, really terrific man, Dr. David Hamburg, who was offered and accepted the chairmanship of the Department of Psychiatry at Stanford. And they moved the whole medical school down from San Francisco to the campus. A lot of people didn't want to leave San Francisco. So it was a relatively new faculty. But I called him and I said, it's not really happy at Mount Sinai. I'm wondering if there are jobs available. And he said, you're hired. And that was it. And I went out to Stanford. And we went in January of 1963. It was an epical trip because as we left our apartment in New York in January, I had two daughters then. One of them was standing by the car, which was loaded with stuff, and there was this little bare part of her stomach. And I kind of worried because it was cold. And then I said, you've got a bug on you. It wasn't a bug, it was a chicken pox. And within a few days, they both had horrible chicken pox. And here we are, we go into a restaurant on our drive to the West Coast, and everybody would move to the other side of the room. By the time we got to California, they just looked awful, and scabs. And I made a decision that I think is one of the best decisions I've ever made. When I crossed Donner Pass, I turned south to Disneyland. And we spent our first 3 days in California in Disneyland. The kids had a great time. They kind of made up for everything. And then we went on up to Stanford.
So we're going to have to switch and bring Tom in just a second. But Al, any last things you want to tell us? Or?
Actually, we fulfilled some of your vision when we did REM deprivation in the rat. And about 5 weeks, but just from REM deprivation alone, eventually all of the rats died. And I was asked before about what was the most surprising result I'd ever seen. It was in the rebound following REM deprivation in the rats. Clete, Ishida, and I were watching the EEG machine to see the start of the rebound. This was the rebound from total sleep deprivation. This is what was surprising. It was a rebound from total sleep deprivation, and we didn't anticipate anything like this. The rebound was all REM sleep. About 60% of the record was REM sleep. It just poured out and did so for several days. And so REM deprivation is an absolutely extraordinary manipulation with very important results, which we
No,
still
that's
don't
it.
understand.
Same thing happened in cats, in effect. I mean, unbelievable
Yeah.
results. But the cats didn't, and there were excitability changes and electroconvulsive shock changes, but the cats just didn't get sick. You know, and that's still a loose end. I mean, somebody needs to go somewhere where your lab isn't going to be bombed and really figure out what the whole story is.